Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. Today I have created a very simple and beautiful thank you card using this beautiful stamp set by Altenew. Well, this is a very simple card, very easy to mass produce in a variety of colors. Before we get started, I would really appreciate if you could take a minute to subscribe to my channel and hit the bell icon so that you get notified each time I post a new video. Let's take a look at this beautiful stamp set by Altenew. It's called the Folk Art Outline Stamp Set. It has this beautiful image which covers an entire A2 size card front and also has some sentiments which says thanks, hello, and love you. Well, you also have a bunch of other sentiments which you could use on your card front or will also be perfect for the insides of your card. Well, we also have coordinating die sets. Here we have two dies, one to cut out the big floral image and the other one to cut out that tiny little leaf image. Well, I will not be using these dies for our cards today. I will be creating simple one-dimensional card. You could use them to cut out big focal points for your cards. Let's stamp this beautiful floral pattern onto this A2 size card panel. Here I'm using a 100-pound white cardstock and I plan on white heat embossing this image onto the white panel, and then using my Simon's stamp positively saturated inks, I plan on ink blending onto the entire panel. Now, since I'm using this stamp for the very first time, it is a lot more sticky than a stamp that has been used for a longer period of time. So, the paper does stick to my stamp. For that, what I do, along with the magnets, I also like to put some painter's tape on the edges of my card panel, just so that when I open the door of my stamping tool, my paper doesn't get stuck to my stamp. Well, the painter's tape can be quite sticky as compared to your regular temporary adhesive or your purple tapes. So all you need to do is rub it against your sleeve and that would remove all of that stickiness. Now, I couldn't use the magnets as is because this image covered the entire panel. So that's why I'm using the painter's tape. Now, to make my stamp a little less sticky, all you can do is either rub your finger against the stamp or like I'm doing here, just run some anti-static powder over it and that would make your stamp little less sticky and your paper won't come along with it when you open the door of your stamping tool. The anti-static powder tool that I'm using here is by Cat Scrappiness, and well, I find this really convenient because I don't get all of that messy anti-static powder all over my fingers. And this is easily retractable and very easy to store away. I'm using Versamark ink to ink up my background. This will help all of that embossing powder to stick well onto the inked stamp. I made sure that every corner of the stamp had all of that Versamark ink, and then once I was done inking, I poured some white embossing powder and heat fixed it using my heat gun. Now, since this is a really large image and we will be heat fixing the entire card panel, make sure to run your heat gun throughout the panel and not keep it concentrated at one place. This will prevent warping of the paper. Well, even after you do that, even after keeping on moving your heat gun, your paper will be warped a little. So one technique that I like to do is keep my paper under a pile of books for a couple of minutes. That will straighten out the paper. Well, it is really difficult to see here on camera how beautiful this is, but once we get all the ink blending done, you will notice how pretty this turned out. Well, I decided to go with the shades of blue for this card. So here I am using my Simon's Stamp Positively Saturated ink in the shades Marine, Cadette and Royal. I wanted to give a lot of ombre look for our card. So here I will be using first the lightest shade Marine and then we will proceed towards the darkest shade, that is Royal. Now, whenever I'm ink blending, I like to place a white printer paper below my card panel just to make sure that I'm getting the proper concentration of color, and also this makes sure that I'm not ruining my work surface. Also, I like to place my stamp pads on the Positively Everything tool, which holds it in place, and I don't need to grab the ink pad whenever I need to get some color on my blending brush. So, my resolution for 2023 was to use a lot of color for my cards. So, instead of going with plain white card base, I decided to go with this royal blue card base. Now, I wanted to show a little bit of border along my front panel instead of sticking it directly onto this card panel. So, here I have my Spellbinders rectangle nested die set, and I will be using the largest rectangle to cut out a smaller piece from this A2 size panel. I made sure that this frame die is perfectly aligned on my A2 size panel and that the stamped image is perfectly centered into this frame. I ran this piece through my die cutting machine and you'll see that this frame die gives a very sharp and crisp border to our panel. I love the beautiful contrast the note card gives to our stamped and ink blended card front. I used foam tape to mount this panel onto our top folding note card. I like some dimension on my cards. Well, you could also use some double-sided tape or some liquid glue to adhere your card front onto your note cards. Now that our card front is ready, let's work on our sentiment strip. Well, I'm using the bold thanks sentiment from the same 4-card outline stamp set. You will see that I'm using a white scrap piece of cardstock to stamp my sentiments. I like to store all of my little scrap pieces well to stamp small images or sentiments. For my sentiment, I will be gold heat embossing the sentiment using the Simon's Stamp gold embossing powder. Again, this is something I like to mention every time I do any kind of embossing is don't forget to use your anti-static powder tool whenever you're doing any kind of embossing. Now for my sentiments, sometimes if the embossing powder sticks outside of the stamped image, I like to use a thin paintbrush to remove any excess powder. We can heat set this using a heat gun. I did cut it out into a little sentiment strip using my paper trimmer. Well, I didn't want to keep this crisp white, so here I am using the lightest shade of blue marine to lightly ink blend all over the sentiment strip. Well, you could leave it white as is, but I like to have a little pop of color even on my sentiment strips. So here you will see I'm not very heavily ink blending the color, just with a very light hand I am adding color on this strip. Now, since this is a very simple single dimensional card, I decided to add some texture to our card. Now, there are many ways to add texture. Here I'm using a gold thread which will perfectly match with my gold heat embossed sentiment. Now, I did use some foam tape to pop up my sentiment strip. Before sticking it onto my card front, I did use the same marine ink to edge the sentiment strip, and now we can fold the thread and adhere it behind the foam tape. You could also use some liquid glue to adhere the thread and place the sentiment strip over it, but I found this technique a lot more easier. I'm using the Simon's Stamp T-square ruler to line my sentiment perfectly on my card front. Using my fine tip barely art glue, I stuck some of the gold hologram sequin mixes by This Calls for Confetti onto my card front. I love the look of this card and well, it was so simple to create and I will definitely be mass producing it in a bunch of different colors. Off camera, I did go ahead and stamp the floral image onto a white envelope and also on the inside of our card. I love how beautiful this project turned out and can't wait to create this in a bunch of different colors. I hope you had fun watching the video and got inspired. I would love for you to become a subscriber to my channel, and if you do subscribe or are already a subscriber, please make sure to hit the bell icon so that you don't miss the next time I post. Thank you again for joining me today. Until next time, stay safe.